Hi all, I'm Jeanette Keynes from Jewelry Arts Inc. In this video, I'm going to show you all about what kind of sheet to use and how big of a piece to cut when you're using my Queen Puabi die formers. Incidentally, they're available right now on my tools site, jewelryartstools.com. I'm so excited to show you how easy it is to make gorgeous handmade beads. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys. Maybe I'll try to start for once without saying so. I'll try to think of another word to begin with. I'm going to show you how you cut the metal for your Queen Puabi dies. You know, I've been so excited about this, so like every time I do a video or anything on it, I will be like, oh, foaming at the mouth, so I apologize in advance. I have predicted in the studio that that will last about 5 years. And then maybe you'll be able to get like a voice or a moment of reason out of me, but this is gonna go on for a while. So just buckle up, fuckers. Here it comes. So the question was, how do you know how big of a piece of sheet to cut for each die, right? So first, just so you know, you can use anywhere between 30 gauge and 26 gauge for any of these dies. A lot of times I just use 30 gauge because you don't really need something heavy. Also, if you're making a little earring, I mean, ancient beads generally were made quite thin. You want them to be light. I mean, who needs to use a pound of gold for something that's gonna hang? But if for any reason you wanna do it heavier, you know, you can go with 26. But past a certain point, it just makes it heavier. You know what I mean? There's no real benefit. And then sometimes people will say, well, what about dents? And I'm like, okay, hollow things will dent. And if you drop a hollow bead from enough of a height, you're gonna get a dent pretty much no matter how thick the metal is. So for me, it's just not worth, you know, obsessing about it, because guess what? Things get dents. I have dents, we all have dents. It's not something that I feel like is, you know, make or break. You wear things, it's gonna look lived in. That just gives it an ancient style patina. It all depends, you know, on how you're looking at it. Okay, so to answer the actual question of how do you decide how big of a piece? So there's all different ones. I have just a couple examples here, but what you'll notice is that some, like this oval one, for example, is not particularly deep. You see what I mean? It's relatively shallow. I'll let Alexis get nice close-ups, but then maybe you'll have a shape like this or a shape like this is the number one, that's a little deeper. This one, you guys don't have this yet, this is upcoming, but this one you see is quite deep. So the deeper the die, the more that the sheet, from you start from the top, is gonna have to like, you know what I mean, sink down in. So the more sheet that it's gonna require. So this is one of those things. This is not an occasion for like, I'm gonna use this tiny little sheet. I don't think it's big enough, but I'm gonna, like, it usually scooches to the side that you don't want it to scooch to and is naughty. So this is what I do. If you've got one that's not so deep, I just lay it on my sheet like this. I just take a Sharpie. Now I'm not measuring this out super exactly. I'm not using a divider. I'm not trying to get straight lines because eventually that's gonna be trimmed off anyway. So this is sort of just like a fast and dirty thing. Okay, with something like this, you could just mark and mark, you know, pretty much just the same size as the top of the die would be plenty for something that isn't that deep, okay? And then I would just, I'll show you, I'll just cut it out with my Joyce Chens. Again, this does not call for sawing or precision in any way. So I would just, you know, like do this and do this. You know, and there's my sheet, so take a look. You see what I mean? Like something like that, perfectly fine. And also I feel like too, when you're doing these, you're gonna do multiples. You know, you do the first one, and then if you're like, okay, well that was crazy too much, you can always dial it back. If you have, but let's go to the other end of, well no, let's go in the middle. If I have one like this that's a little deeper, maybe I'll set this on my sheet, and I'm just gonna give myself a little bit more, like a couple millimeters sticking out in all directions, like that. Do you see what I'm saying? And again, this is not an ultra precision thing. It's just give yourself a little extra like that, and I'll cut it out. The only time that I'd be very generous is with something like this that's rather deep, and I'll just show you what I mean with that. So if I have one like this, where like I said, you can see that that's, you know, and it's gonna make such a fat, gorgeous shape. You're gonna love it. This makes an earring. It's out of this world. But something like this is gonna take more. So maybe I'll put this here. Of course, now my sheet is all, and you know, give myself, you know, a little more of a generous amount.
But I noticed you didn't put,
Well, I'll scooch that over like that.
No, I was just wondering, so you would only need it, you would still need more.
You still need some extra. So if I slide that over, you know what I mean? Okay, maybe I'll, you know what I mean? Something like that. But you see what I mean? Just make sure you have a generous amount. Because what you'll also notice is they tend to sink in mainly in one direction. They don't tend to sink in evenly. You'll see it when you do it. It's not anything you have to worry about. But what you'll notice is when we were doing some of these, it's like you start with this sort of rectangle and then you end up with a waist. Like it sort of like sinks in the middle. You'll see what I mean.
Okay.
So I'll cut this one out and show you what it looks like just sitting on top. Now I can trim off this little extra bit here, or I can just leave it on. It's eventually gonna get trimmed off anyway, but like something like that. Like that one, I'm being pretty generous. And you probably could get away with a little bit less, but because here's, I'll explain too what happens, because you know, it's so important to tell you what to do, and then perhaps even more important than that, to say what not to do. If you're like, I'm gonna, you know, I can get away with a little less kind of a thing, and like, let's say, okay, like for example, if you cut yours, be a little more naughty, because you know we all sometimes get a little naughty. If you're trying to be like, oh, I think that's enough. Do you know what I mean? What's gonna happen when you tamp it down in there? You just move that a little bit. It will scooch to the wrong direction, so that you have too much on one side and not enough on the other. This is one of those like naughty studio fuckery things. Like you never make two jump rings. Because if you make only, you make two, guaranteed one melts and one drops on the floor. It's like one of those things. So if you try to be too sensible and use less sheet, it will always end up scooching, you know what I mean, and doing like that kind of a thing, okay? Don't let it happen to you. But if you find that you're being a little too generous, like next time you cut it, you can dial it back a little bit. But it's just, you need that extra because it's gonna wiggle a little bit and it's gonna sink down in there. Okay?